the deal was announced,
Yeah.
and then before Labour even had a chance to celebrate, it was like it was
like, this is terrible.
It was like Verdun. It was being shelled to pieces. Increasingly, it feels a bit more like, Maggie Thatcher Milk Snatcher. Feels like one of those things that is just not going to go away. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Division Bell. This week we'll be mopping up all the fallout from last week's seismic local elections. We're going to be talking VE Day and trade deals with India and America. My name's Christian Calgie.
I'm Lizzy Buchan.
And this is The Division Bell.
Okay, so local elections. Who are the big winners and losers?
Well, the winners were obviously Reform. They won, honestly, twice as many seats as I think I was expecting them to win. They won mayoralties. They won more. They won councils, whole councils. They decimated the Tories and the Labour Party. And things are looking very, very rosy for Nigel Farage. The worst, obviously the Tories were appallingly bad, much worse than people were expecting. Again, they tried doing this expectation management briefing. They lost more seats than the expectation management briefing.
They've been wiped out.
Completely wiped out. I think they lost every single council. It's their worst result in about 130 years or something insane. But also, the reason that they've not come up in conversation is because they're just not as relevant anymore. Whereas the Labour Party, they didn't lose as many seats, but there weren't as many Labour wards. I think next year is going to be really bad if you look at the trends of what happened. And the Lib Dems, and they came second. It's so easy to forget about the Lib Dems.
And
Believe me, I try.
But the Greens did really well. But yeah, the Lib Dems are like eating up
the establishment
Tory
is
seats.
just collapsing.
I mean, obviously we could talk about a lot about Labour, and that is really important. But I think it's so interesting that the Tories were obliterated and no one cares.
Yeah,
and
now they're down to 1 point above the Lib Dems.
And the Lib Dems are parking their tanks all over Middle England. And Reform are taking their seats from the other side. I mean, if anyone was paying attention or cared about what Kemi Badenoch was doing, she'd be in quite a lot of trouble.
Yeah, but it's a funeral no one wants to turn up to. What are you hearing from your Labour contacts at the moment?
I think party strategists on both sides weren't expecting the significance of the kind of surge of Reform, but I think the very public fallout has been in Labour rather than the Conservatives. I think there has been, my impression has been that there's been unease about certain policies like the winter fuel cut, the disability benefits cuts, some of these things that have been done. There's been bubbling for quite a long time, and it's like the local elections almost sort of burst that bubble, and MPs who normally don't speak out publicly against the leadership have suddenly started doing so, and the level of anger and unease is really palpable. I don't know if you've felt this, but I've always thought when you're in Parliament a lot, you get a sense of the mood. It's really tangible almost. And I came back in on Tuesday and thought something feels different here compared to last week. And everyone I've spoken to, whether it's sort of, there's the left-wing MPs who are always quite critical of Keir Starmer's leadership, but there's moderates, the Red Wall group of MPs who are quite a sort of new and powerful group, about 45 of them in the North and the Midlands, are being very, very strong on it. I mean, Jo White from Bassetlaw, who's one of their more prominent members, was saying she thinks the threat to Labour is existential.
Yeah. There's no guarantee of loyalty from newly elected MPs anymore, and they do want results straight away, and they're already speaking out.
I think there is a moment where it feels like a bit of a moment where if the facts are starting to change, there's last July when the winter fuel allowance cut was announced by Rachel Reeves, it was controversial at the time, certainly, but it was so early into Labour's time in government that some MPs kept their counsel. I mean, supporters of the Labour Party, like the trade unions, the Mirror, sort of kept our counsel on it, sort of said, we think that this is we don't really like this as a decision, but we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt and see what happens. And, you know, fast forward now to May, voters have told MPs what they think of it. Every MP I've spoken to across the country, I've been trying to talk to as many people as I can, you know, East Anglia, the South, the North, everyone's saying the thing that came up over and over again is the winter fuel card.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people probably thought that you do it this early on, you know, voters probably forget about it by the time of the next election. But increasingly, it feels a bit more like, Maggie Thatcher milk snatcher. Feels like one of those things that is just not going to go away.
I think it's partly what you said about Margaret Thatcher. It's become a sort of totemic thing. Obviously, the winter fuel allowance was, you know, was stripped from, I think, around 10 million pensioners. It's a payment of up to £300, and it obviously there are a lot of people within that group who, you know, maybe are quite wealthy and maybe don't need it, but a lot of really vulnerable pensioners really struggling with energy bills, with just the cost of living. That on top of everything else, I think, has made life very, very difficult for lots of vulnerable people. And even at the time, there were charities, campaigners, even MPs saying the threshold is too strict, it's too tight, and too many vulnerable people are getting caught by this cliff edge. But I think there's something about, you know, the idea of taking away money that elderly people use to heat their homes, you know, that doesn't feel like a Labour policy. It doesn't feel like the kind of, I don't know, if you're voting Labour in the general election, I don't think anyone voted for that. No. And I don't think the government really realised how much of a kind of image issue that was going to become, and how much people would feel that as a kind of visceral reaction.
I think it's definitely largely around the threshold, although there's a mandate issue as well, because of course it wasn't in the manifesto. But I was on television early this week on a phone-in show, and the amount of pensioners that we had calling in who were actually saying, you know, it's to do with the threshold. If the threshold were higher, if this were about rich pensioners, if this were about people who had a very large, you know, £1 million private pension, but 11,500 is so low, you know, that we would not accept that as a cut-off for working age entitlement to welfare, would we? And, you know, there's a much wider problem here for government around IT systems and all the rest of it. So I believe that's why it was so low. You either had a system where everyone gets it, no one gets it, or you have this very low threshold which matches some other criteria. But it's I just think it's so bad, especially for Labour. As you say, it's an image thing.
And there's an expectation that a Labour government will behave in a different way to a Conservative government. I think it didn't fit with what people thought Labour were going to do, and the way they did it in July for the winter.
Yeah.
But then the pension triple lock didn't go up until April. So there was this period of time where obviously people weren't getting that extra benefit. And I think they sold it in a way where they put it out in July and then didn't put anything around with it about what help was going
exactly.
to.
I mean, that was so much of what's going wrong with this government is comms, right? And a lot of people in Westminster say that the communications are good enough. And that was a great example. You have this situation where Rachel Reeves comes out shortly after the election with this claim of £22 billion black hole. So she fills it with the, you know, various tax rises and winter fuel and all the rest of it. But then there's this enormous wait before the budget. So if they'd done it at the same time, you could have sweetened the pill.
Yes.
But as it was, there was months of anger.
Because in the budget they put billions of pounds into the health service. There was quite a lot of stuff in there that was quite good and that sort of landed okay at the time. And then there's been this long hangover of all of these things. And I feel like this certainly seems to me like the greatest moment of danger for the government. This is the moment they'd been the most kind of vulnerable to their own pressure from their own backbenchers. They're trying to change the narrative and they've been struggling a bit to do that this week. I mean, even, you know, as the Mirror, where we see ourselves as a critical friend of the Labour Party, we support the Labour Party, we want a Labour government to succeed. But even, we put on our front page that we thought this was wrong. And I think that is also a sign of that public opinion is hardening, that it's not just us, the trade unions, MPs are starting to talk publicly about this, that this is a moment where actually, the PM came out on Friday and said, we've heard what voters have said. We're going to go further and faster to bring about change. And that there is, I think he's right in the sense that the public are just desperate for things to get better. Like they just really want change to happen. But saying we're going to go further and faster on things that the public have clearly rejected.
Yes. Sounds like worse is coming.
I think that wound up a lot of the MPs who decided to break ranks and say, we don't like this, because I think they felt it was a bit
tone deaf.
I think tin-eared was a phrase I heard used. I think talking about comms might sound a bit Westminster bubbly, but it is so important. Like, what the public hear from politicians is what matters. Like, if the public don't feel reassured or confident in what a government is doing, it doesn't matter really whether it's doing good things or not. Rishi Sunak learnt that to his cost.
Yeah.
Joe Biden did as well. You can be doing stuff, but if the public doesn't feel it, doesn't believe in it, then they're not going to support you. And I think this is the government have to find a way to be set, like telling people and making them believe in their plan. Have you heard the stat that 2/3 of Gen Z don't know the significance of VE Day?
That's genuinely surprising. I mean, I have pretty low faith in younger generations of Brits anyway, but 2/3 not understanding the significance of what happened. And I think what's really worrying is remembrance is so important to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And in an era where we're looking at the rise of extremism across the world of all sorts, whether it's secular or political or gender or race, to have 2/3 not know why it's important to remember the day that Nazism was destroyed in mainland Europe is so chronically depressing. And I do bemoan the memories of those who fell and died across Europe, because I think what was their sacrifice for if we can't remember what they were fighting for? It's so shocking. And I don't know if this is a failure on the part of parents, on the part of society, on the part of teachers, or on the part of the children themselves. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they're happy to consider the fact that Hitler could have, defeated democracy and freedom of speech and freedom of religion and all the rest of it. But if we don't turn this around quickly, then I think not only did they die in vain, but society itself is very, very close to the brink. I think it's a laziness. I think it's an intellectual laziness. I think it feeds into the basically the abolition of attention span amongst young children. But yeah, of course,
a moral panic.
Of course, no. But we should be. The word remembrance means to not forget why terrible things in our history happened, so we are not doomed to repeat them. And by forgetting them, we are slipping towards it. The reason why maybe Gen Z are more flirting with extreme politics is because we don't remember the garden path that leads us up. And that is all our fault. That is society's fault. It's politicians' fault. It's Tony Blair's fault for butchering the curriculum 30 years ago. But we've all got a part to play. And if we start being blasé about this sort of stuff, then, we may as well forget it.
It has been a difficult week for the government, obviously, and we've talked about the problems with communicating the good stuff. There have actually been some quite good developments this week. I mean, we found out that a trade deal was signed with India. This was something that Boris Johnson promised would definitely be done by Diwali in 2022. So, that has been in the pipeline for quite a long time. It's quite a big deal, this. Can you talk us through some of the details?
It's the largest trade deal that we have signed since Brexit in terms of what it's going to add to the economy. It's just a jot under 5 billion quid. And most importantly, it's not just goods, it includes services, which is not just enormous for Britain and India, but that Anglo-Indian relationship, a lot of trading in services between the two. And also, I suppose that one of the big benefits for Keir Starmer is that it doesn't include anything on visas, which was a key demand from the Indian side of things, and Labour managed to avoid giving into. Now, there has been a row over national insurance contributions, because before this trade deal, an Indian business based in Britain who brought over workers, that worker would be paying, or the business would be paying national insurance in both Britain and in India, so they were double taxed. Now, this deal is going to wipe that out on both sides. So for up to 3 years, a worker, either Indian in Britain or British in India, won't pay national insurance for up to 3 years, which it sparked a bit of a backlash. What was that about?
I mean, this was a classic thing again of slightly poor communication, that the Tories seized on this despite having
instantly. I mean, it was just like the deal was announced, and then before Labour even had a chance to celebrate, it was like it was just,
this is terrible.
It was like Verdun. It was being shelled to pieces.
Yeah, despite the fact that the Tories have been pushing for this for years and failing, and also the Indian trade deal was one of the big Brexit benefits. You know, Boris Johnson was really into it, and they've been negotiating for ages, including when Kemi Badenoch was the trade secretary. So more on that later. But yeah, the Tories sort of seized on this and saying, you know, this is going to effectively mean that there are sort of tax cuts it's going to mean that companies favour Indian workers, cheaper to hire them, which the government didn't really explain properly initially. And then yesterday they had to come out and sort of say, actually, we have this kind of agreement in another 50 trade deals, including, I think, with Canada, some of the agreements, Japan as well. And speaking of trade, also the other kind of big thing is we heard overnight that Donald Trump was going to give a press conference, which will be after we've recorded this, about a trade deal with a sort of very important country.
We know no idea who it was. Could be.
Soon emerged.
But Keir Starmer's doing a press conference.
Yeah. So there's going to be some sort of trade agreement with the UK, which is a massive deal. It's not a full trade deal, but this is part of our attempts to see off the worst of the tariffs,
exactly,
basically,
to mitigate that. And the pound has rallied already at the hopes of this, to the extent it does mitigate. Now, I wonder if it's going to be possible to get that general 10% tariff. I don't know if that's movable, but I do wonder if on steel and cars, which is a 25% tariff, if he could get something on that. That would be another impressive win. And also, I think there's probably less worry about visas with the USA than there is with India. But.
Yeah, I think the key thing is that this sort of general 10% tariff that he has applied on trade with basically everyone,
in the world,
that doesn't sound like it can move. But these 25% tariffs on steel and cars seem to be up for debate, and that would be a massive win, because that's really punitive for big industries in Britain and
in Labour areas.
Areas.
So there's a major prize for Keir Starmer there in sort of South Wales and
Labour areas and places
Coventry.
where Reform are trying to make gains. Yeah. So I think that will be a big win if we get some good news on that. Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Division Bell. Follow us on socials, and we'll see you again next week.